Also, a Louisiana legal challenge to remove former President Donald Trump's place on this state's primary ballot.
This month, a Chalmette woman filed a lawsuit in East Baton Rouge Parish alleging that the former president engaged in an insurrection violating the U.S. Constitution. Our Chris Joseph spoke with political analysts about this lawsuit. Chris.
Well, of course, the first thing to know is the argument mirrors that case in Colorado, which, of course, is likely heading to the U.S. Supreme Court. The analysts I spoke with say this case likely won't be successful, and similar cases have already failed in Michigan, Minnesota, and Arizona. Now, that Chalmette woman, Ashley Reeb, is suing Louisiana Secretary of State Kyle Ardoin to keep Trump off the primary ballot. She cites the U.S. Constitution, which states no one may hold office if they've engaged in an insurrection or helped insurrectionists. Reeb points to the January 6th riot at the Capitol, where Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol on the false premise that Trump won the 2020 election. Now, Trump has continued to push that false narrative since he lost. Now, she also cites the House of Representatives impeachment in 2021. However, he was not convicted by the Senate, and he has not been criminally convicted for January 6th. An LSU professor says the impeachment and following indictments likely aren't enough for this case to move forward.
The whole meaning of the rule of law is that a prosecutor can't just jail you because he thinks you've done something wrong. That's only the first step. The prosecutor makes the charge, and then it has to go to trial. And of course, that's what happened with the Trump impeachment. The impeachment is a prosecution, but he was not he was not convicted of those offenses.
Now, the case here in Louisiana has already been assigned a judge. Today, Trump posted on Truth Social that a similar attempt in Michigan was, quote, a pathetic gambit to rig the election.